Begin the current Daf, Mesechus Rosh Hashanah Daf Chav. Begin on the top line of the Amud. We continue explaining the halacha of our previous Mishnah regarding the shofar that was used to blow in the Beis Hamikdash on Rosh Hashanah, regarding actually how it was and how it was blown. Shir corresponds by Kazak and Cheskel turning to Daf. Hashem is joining us in today's Daf. Some of the things discussed in today's Daf are a continuation of the various laws of the shofar used in Rosh Hashanah, a clarification on the use of trumpets together with the shofar performed in the Beis Hamikdash. Exactly how did they do that? It brings in the famous machlokes whether the world was created at the beginning of Nisan or Tishrei. Some important terms of concept we discussed in today's Daf are Tekiyah Shofar, which says Yom Trua Yelechem, and Yom Zichron Trua, that we blow the shofar on Rosh Hashanah. Chatzaitres is that when there's a difficulty, so then we blow with the trumpets. Tishrei Nivra Olam is the opinion that the world was created in Tishrei. There's the other opinion of Nisan Nivra Olam. Then there's the concept of Trei Kol Mishtamai, which means to say that one cannot hear two different sounds at the same time. So beginning the current Daf Chav Zayin, top line of the Amud, we said in the Mishnah that a piv mitzupazav, that by the shofar in Beis Hamikdash, the mouth of the shofar was plated with gold. It says Gemara, I have a time when the Bryce it's supposed if you plate it with gold, the machmanochas piv, where you put the mouth, puzzle, it's invalid. And Rashi explains the reason for this is because then you're blowing in the gold, you're not blowing in the shofar. If it's not where the mouth is, then Karsh is going to be valid. So how can you say in the Mishnah that the mouth was plated with gold? So Mabai says, Kitan, I'm misleading. When our Mishnah said that the piv was mitzvah, which you're right, it wasn't exactly where the mouth went, and therefore it was kosher, but if it was by where exactly the mouth is, you wouldn't be considered blowing in the shofar. Said in the Mishnah that we had the shofaris were in the middle, the shofar was in the middle, and you had two trumpets on either side, meaning one on one. Says Gemara, how could that be? Can you hear two sounds? How can you hear the shofar and the trumpet at the same time? You have to be yetzer, the shmoya kol shofar. You have to hear. You can't hear it because you have another sound of the trumpet. Because Vatani in the Bryce it says there's a pasuk in Shemois by the Luchas Rishonim says Zocher Yom Shabbos Kacha. We have a pasuk in Devarim that says V'Shomer Yom Shabbos. So what does that mean? Zocher V'Shomer b'dibur echad nemru. They were both said with one word. What the mouth obviously cannot say. You can't say two words at the same time. I know people could put me on double speed or triple speed, but you definitely can't hear the same word at the same time. And that the ears cannot hear it at the same time. So you see clearly from the Brisa that you can't hear two words simultaneous, can't hear two sounds simultaneous. So how could you say that you're blowing the shofar at the same time as the trumpet? Says the Gemara, lekach mayrich b'shofar. That's actually why they were lengthy by the Tekiyah shofar, so that you can hear the shofar after the trumpeters stop playing, because you're right, you can't hear it at the same time. Like we said in the Mishnah, we said that they would be marach b'shofar and mekatze b'chatzaitzes. Says Gemara, remember that to say the Chishama said Tekiyah, that if you hear just the end of the Tekiyah, below Tchilas Tekiyah, because you're missing the first part of the Tekiyah, because the trumpets are drowning it out, that Yatz, you can fill your obligation, and so too, the Gemara just wants to say the other way too. So by default, you would be saying that Tchilas Tekiyah, that if you have just the beginning of the shofar blast, the loisib Tekiyah without the end, just would be Yetza also, because what should be the difference here in just the end of the Tekiyah without the beginning, or the beginning without the end? And as Rashi just points out, only because I wanted to ask on both those diyukim, so therefore it makes it. But the question would be, even if you just had the first halacha, that you're only having the end, but be that as it may, Tashema, what do you mean? That's difficult from the Mishnah later on, because the Mishnah later on says, Taka b'rishonim. Let's say you did your first Tekiyah, meaning not actually your first Tekiyah, but let's say you did your Tekiyah, and you did your first Tekiyah, what's called the Pshuta, you did your first Tekiyah before the Trua. And then the Mashach b'shni kishtayim. So you did a Tekiyah, then you did a Trua, so the Rishon is the first Tekiyah, then you do your Trua, and then the Mashach b'shni kishtayim. Then, by your second Tekiyah, you did it the length of how long two Tekiyahs would take. Now the reason why is because right now you have to do two consecutive Tekiyahs. You have to do your Tekiyah after the Malchias, and then one for the Tekiyah before the Zechronis. So what happens if you did that second Tekiyah as long as, how long two Tekiyahs would be? Let it be the first one of the next one. No, it says the Mishnah later on, it's only going to count for one Tekiyah. But why? Based on what you're saying, Amai, to Salik Lobatarti, why can't you consider cut it into half and you said you don't have to hear the whole tekiah, you can only hear part of the tekiah. So let the first part be the end of the first, the key of the first cycle, and then let the second half be for the second one. Says the Gemara, no, we're not cutting up tekiyas from each other in half. You're right, if you only heard half of the tekiyah, you'd be yaitza, but we're not going to say as if we're cutting it up, but splicing it and saying that if it's one for the last one and one for the next one. Someone says, okay, Tashma, I'll have a different question for you. The next Mishnah says, someone blows the shofar into a pit, or the techadus, which bar and dus are really the same thing. It's just that bar is dug into the ground, and dus is like a cistern that's built on top of the ground. But either way, or he blows into a large barrel, so it depends. Every hears the sound of the shofar, the actual sound, and this is where the technology with microphones and all these things come up with these types of ideas. If you hear the actual sound of the shofar, then you yaitz it. But if you hear the echo, although it sounds like the same shofar blast, hello, 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 but you're not hearing the actual sound itself, it's the echo, then lo yatsa, then you have not fulfilled the obligation. That has to Gemara, based on what you're telling me, leipik b'tchilas tekiah, even if someone's blowing into the pit, he should be yaitz with the first part of the tekiah, mekmeid la'arv kala, before it gets mixed up with the echo, because when you scream hello, hello, so first you hear for the moment, you hear the first sound, and then it gets mixed up with the echo that's reverberating with it. But you hear the first part of it, and therefore you're saying that's all you need. You don't have to hear the whole tekiah, so why are you not yaitza? So the Gemara says you're right. The Gemara rejects what we're saying up until now. Ella, the reason why, the truth is that you're not yaitza with miktzas tekiah, as we see from this halacha of blowing the shofar into the pit. So then the question is, so again we're back to the question, how you yaitza then when you're blowing the tekiah with the chatzaitzes if you're not hearing the whole tekiah? Says the Gemara, but you're incorrect on a different point. Tarti koli mechad gavra. When you have two sounds from the same person, meaning like by Zachav Shama, or when Hashem was saying both of those, Lemishlema, you're right. That the Brisa was saying that cannot be heard generally. It was a miracle, and that's what the Brisa says that and the Eisen cannot usually hear that. But two sounds, which is coming from two different people, which one is blowing the shofar, one is blowing the chatzaitzes, that could be heard. Says, well, is that really so? Can you hear two different sounds that come from two different people? But by time when the Brisa says, but Torah, when they're learning from the Torah, one person reads from the Torah, and some other times they would have that the interpreter would have the person who is translating the Torah. And the girsa is as long as you don't have one person reading. And the main point is anyways the next with V'shnai mitargim. You don't have two people that are interpreting. Now, why don't you have two people interpreting? Because you can't hear two interpreters. Who is speaking? You're translating or you're translating. So even though it's Trei Gabri, you see Trei Kol Lemishtamai. So we're back to the question. You see even two different voices that, let's say one's the trumpet, one's the shofar, you can't hear it. So how are you being yaitzu with the tekiah shofar, with the trumpets in the Beis HaMikdash? Says the Gemara, no, Halei Damya. This you cannot compare. This halacha, the shofar, is actually not like this halacha that you're bringing me from this Reisha, this Brisa regarding Kriyas HaTorah, and the Sefer, rather it's comparable to the Sefer of that Brisa. The Brisa says, in contrast to Kriyas HaTorah, but the Halal, with a Megillah, Afila Asara Koden, that even if 10 people are reading it together, and there's 10 different voices, because it can't be exactly to say the words in synchronicity of the exact same word, that one shouldn't be a little bit earlier, one a little later, that still you can be yaitza even though 10 people are saying it. So what do you see from that? You see that Kivin the Chaviv, since it's very dear to a person because it's a novelty, you wait all year for Megillah's Esther, and even Hal make a din when it's said on the Yom Tovim, but it's not as a common thing that you have daite. The person pays attention and he'll hear it. So Hachinami also about the Tekiah Shofar, given the Chaviv, since it's very dear, it's once a year by Rosh Hashanah, you have daite Rosh Hashanah, a person pays attention and he hears it, and that's why you can be yaitzi. Even though there's trumpets playing at the same time, you're going to hear the Tekiah of the Shofar. But then the Gemara says, if that's the case, so then Elolam Ma'ach b'Shofar. Originally, we thought the reason why you said you would do Tekiah Shofar longer, so you could hear part of it after the trumpeter stopped. Now that you tell me you could hear it even during the trumpeter, so what's the point of making Tekiah Shofar longer? So I was like, well, that's just Leidish Mitzvah Yom B'Shofar. It's just to let you know that the primary mitzvah of the day is Tekiah Shofar. And that's why by tiniest we said the trumpeters play longer, simply so that you should know what's the primary and what's secondary. Mishnah continued and said the tiniest by a public fast, so they would b'shel zachar, they would blow with the horn of a ram, which was kafufin, which was bent. Upiv mitzuba kesef, and its mouth was plated with silver.
So why did you need a nice plated with silver? Now you saw the shama of chaver, so you need hakos as well.
Yeah, well, also because they're both chaver, zocher and shama. I don't know. Meaning, if the shofar is the chaver from the trumpet, you'll hear the shofar out of the trumpet.
No,
but you're not going to hear both of them.
no, how do we get it?
Yeah, but you're only hearing one. You only need to hear one. I don't know if you could hear all of them. Is that you could hear all of them? It's a good question. If you say you could hear all of them, then I could hear that question. Unless you say that there's a difference between chad and trey. But I'm saying, does that mean that you're hearing them all? Does trey calling mishtamoy mean to say you're hearing both? I hear. Then why do you need a miracle of what would that mean? Unless you're saying one by one person, that then you can't hear that. If the Gemara remains with that. Yeah, good question. So the Gemara says, Maishna Hasam, what's the difference over there? Meaning, as opposed to Rosh Hashanah, that in the Beis Hamikdash, the Zav, there we said it was plated with gold. Maishna Hacha, why over here by the public fast was it the kesef made out of silver? So the Gemara says, Ibaisim, everyone you could say, because Kol Kenufia, all gatherings was the kesef. They're all with silver, and the reason is because it says a pasuk in Bamidbar. It says, make for yourself 2 trumpets of silver, and it says over there in that pasuk it should be for you lemikra eda or lemasas amachnas, when you gather everyone together. So that's the same thing over here by the mouth of the shofar of a tainus, which was to gather people together. Over here, if you want, you could say it's coming from a different angle. The Torah was concerned about Yiddish geld as in Mediftis, on the Jewish people money. As Rashi brings, the famous example they always bring is, like it says in Yikri Yadalad, that the Kohen would command and he would clear out the house, that when they had to declare a tummy, that to get the stuff out. Now, everything that's in the house, that's metal, whatever, you could title it. The only thing is that you have to be concerned about that you won't be able to live as a kli cheres, earthenware vessel, but you cannot have tar in the mikvah. Kli cheres is something that's not worth that much. It's like the person who's cleaning out those disposable plates, and that's the type of person we're talking about. That's what kli cheres is, and that's what the Torah is concerned about. So therefore, the Torah said, no, you don't have to use gold. You could use silver because we don't want you to spend too much money. So the Gemara says the Hasan Nami never did. Says why Rosh Hashanah is any different? Is you're concerned about Yiddish Gad, so why Rosh Hashanah are we putting on gold? Says Yomar Nafil even so Kavod Yom Tov. Still, you're right. Hashem's concerned about money. It's Kimtze Ayom Tiv Mamachta Kavod Yom Tov. And then we put it on heavy. We lay it on with gold. Now, Rav Papa Bar Shmuel Sava Lemeva Ubdi Kamas Nitin. He thought that he's going to do like our Mishnah. That he was going to blow on Rosh Hashanah with a shofar and trumpets. Because like you saw in the Mishnah says there's trumpets and a shofar. So Rabbi said to him, no, this that we said that you have trumpets on the side and you're blowing the shofar. Imagine you come in next to Rosh Hashanah, there's a trumpeters here on the side of the Baltikeya. He says, no, that was only in the Beis Hamikdash. So Tamar was only in the Bryce Bedroom. When we say that the Hamikdash is in the Beis Hamikdash of Gvulan, but on the Beis Hamikdash, so then it's one or the other. Malkum Sheish Chatzayt is when you're blowing trumpets, for example, on the public fast, then ain't shofar, then there's no shofar. Malkum Sheish, when there is a shofar, for example, on Rosh Hashanah and on Yovel, then ain't Chatzayt, then no trumpets. And the Gemara brings again, Mechein Hinnik. So too, that he wanted to do, like our Mishnah, to do shofar and trumpets, was Reb Chalafta b'Tzipayim, and Reb Chananya ben Tzirad b'Mesechtim. When the Chacham heard about this, they said, this is not what they did. Only in Temple Mount on the eastern gates. But out of the Beis Hamikdash, you don't have both trumpets and your shofar. What's the pasuk that you spoke that it's only in the Beis Hamikdash? Because the pasuk is in Tehillim, with trumpets and the sound of a shofar. They blew it in front of the King Hashem. Now, that tells us, when do you have Chatzot V'Kol Shofar? Only for Hashem. But out of Beis Hamikdash, then you don't have both. It's either one or the other. Now, we said in the Mishnah that Shabbat HaYovel Rosh Hashanah. The Tanakama held that Yovel is the same as Rosh Hashanah for L'Tkiya or L'Brachas V'Chulu. For Tkiya, Rashi explained over there was that you should use a Pshutin, a straight shofar of a Yal, and that's going to be the same Rosh Hashanah as Yom Kippurim. And the second thing was Ula Brachas V'Chulu, that the brachas that you say on Rosh Hashanah, you're going to say the same thing on Yom Kippur. Now, relating back to the halacha of the Mishnah, the Gemara brings the following teaching. Amar Rabbi Shmuel by Yitzchak says, according to whom do we daven when we do today on Rosh Hashanah? We say, this day is the beginning of your actions. Zicharli Amrishon, it's a memory for the first day. Says the Gemara, come on, who's that like? Rabbi Eliezer. Tell me that he says, that the world was created in Tishrei, because on Aleph Tishrei, which Rosh Hashanah we say, Zeh Tchilas Masechah, according to Yeshua, that's not Zeh Hayom Tchilas Masechah, which places actually brings, but Lamaisa, we do paskin like Rabbi Shloimy, we say Zeh Hayom Tchilas Masechah. So it says what it must mean is that it's Tchilas Masechah of Tchilas of the Ma'asav Din, that the Welt is judged on this day. That would be why we say Zeh Hayom Tchilas Masechah. But the Gemara assumes that that means like it's like Rabbi Eliezer. The whole world was created in Tishrei. The problem is, must have been Ravina asked. We said in that Mishnah we just quoted a second ago that Shavi Yebel to Rosh Hashanah, that Yebel is the same to Rosh Hashanah. Let's kill the brachas for that, the way the type of shofar that you blow with, and for the brachas. Now the problem is, Va'ika, you told me, what do we say in Rosh Hashanah davening? Zeh Hayom Tchilas Masechah Zikron Yom Rishon. So that makes sense to be Rosh Hashanah. You said that I can understand. You can say those words on Rosh Hashanah, but Yebel Esa, you can't say that on Yovel. So how are you telling me that that's what you say, the same thing Rosh Hashanah as you say on Yovel? Meaning, the Zechrein is Malchus Shofars, I can understand you could say that. It makes sense you would say that on Yovel. But how are you saying Zeh Tchilas Masechah? Says Gemara, you're right, Kiktani, when did we say that the same bracha, same davening, you take the Rosh Hashanah Machzor and use on Yovel? Yeah, that would you would admit, it would say in the Machzor it says, in Yom Kippurim of Yovel, that you were going to skip these psukim. It's only Ashara on the rest. You're right, you wouldn't say Zeh Tchilas Masechah. Now that's one version of this discussion. Rabbi Shloimy Schwartzberg, he taught it differently. I'm going to Shmuel Bayitz. Like it says, now this is what in the Mishnah. Shabbat Yev Rosh Hashanah Kila Baracha is. So he's starting off first from our Mishnah. The first version had it that we're saying our Nusach from the Machzor and saying who's that like and then asking from a Mishnah. Here he's starting from the Mishnah. He's saying this is what in the Mishnah. That Yovel is the same Rosh Hashanah for the Kiddush Brachas. Come on, who's that like? Says the Gemara, Dub like Rabbi Eliezer. That's not like Rabbi Eliezer. Because the Rabbi Eliezer would be like Rabbi Eliezer. Like even though Tishrei, since he says the world was created in Tishrei, Ha'ikah Zayim Tchilas Masechah. But what do you mean? We have in the Nusach that it says Rosh Hashanah that this is the beginning of your actions, the Chol Yom Rishon, which recalls the first day. Where the Rosh Hashanah used to be able to last, that's only Rosh Hashanah, not on Yovel. So how would you say that you would have the same brachas on the Rosh Hashanah Machzor that you say on Yom Kippurim of Yovel? That says the Gemara, no, Kitani Ashara. When did we say that the same brachas are on Yovel? Is the rest of the brachas, but Zayim Tchilas Masechah, which we do say because according to Rabbi Eliezer, it is B'Tishnu Olam. That you wouldn't say when you're saying the Nusach on Yom Kippurim of Yovel. I get to the next Mishnah, continuing on these halachas of shofar blowing. Now regarding the actual structure, the actual shofar itself of what invalidates the shofar. So the Mishnah says shofar shenistak. If you have a shofar that cracked, with dovkoi, and then you attach it with, Rashi says devik, which is he called glued. He glued it. You put on glue. Oh, so then puzzle, it's invalid. But divik, and so to divik shivri shofar. So let's say you attach pieces of a broken piece of a shofar together, and you put Humpty Dumpty back together again. So puzzle, it's invalid because there's like two shofars. It's not one shofar. Tintam is bays. Now, however, let's say nikiv. Let's say there's a whole which place to discuss exactly what's this case, but let's say it's on one side. It's not a broken. It's not like the case that we said before. It was nistak b'dovkoi. But rather, it's not b'dovkoi. It's not like using glue, but b'sasmoi. Rather, it seals. So then it depends. This discusses are we talking about how it sounds before you seal it or after you seal it?
In his dark, was separated two, or was it only a little
crack?
Because that could be a seismic. Because the idea is that it's not made to one, but is the nisdak means really split into two?
Oh, no, it's that. What do you mean into two? Meaning that it's the whole thing itself?
Otherwise,
yeah, no, we're going to see that later on. What happens if it's the whole length or the width? But this is a crack, and then he seals it.
So it would be just like Nika B'Sasmoy.
But this is Nika B'Sasmoy.
Okay, Nika B'Sasmoy is that. Okay, nisdak.
You mean nisdak versus nikav?
Yes.
Right. Here we're saying
that means it's in two pieces. No. In this case.
So probably this case because it's two.
What do you see means like two? What do you mean? What do you see means like two?
Because what's the issue? Why you not?
No, that was the second case of like two shefaras. That was dibik shivri shefaras. Actually, You know, it's not actually. Where's the word puzzle going on?
No, but the first.
The different master of puzzle doesn't say which one it's actually going on.
Oh, that's right. No, Shefer Shnizdak without the puzzle, that's right there.
No, it could be on the next word on Divik Shibir to Shefar's puzzle. That different master just says puzzle, doesn't say which one it's going on.
No, you started with the Shefer Shnizdak, they did go puzzle.
Right, but then there's Divik Shibir to Shefar's puzzle.
Okay.
So that different master of puzzle, the Rashi has like two Shefars is going on which case.
Oh. So what's the difference with Nika? What does
Right, so Nika means a hole.
So why is it
And
easier?
this thing means a crack.
So a hole is even worse than a crack.
Well, maybe not,
Why?
because a crack is
It's locally. That's the point. Is it locally or is it the whole thing?
I don't know if that would mean, I don't know if that would necessarily mean how much of
The
it
hole
is.
is about the sound. The crack is about, is it a shafer anymore?
Which one?
The hole is about the sound.
Right, why?
Is it changing the sound?
And the crack is, what's the crack? What's
Do
the
you have a
problem?
shafer, no?
Well, but the hole also you're missing because of the shefer.
Okay, and what's the problem with that?
So it's not a shafer that's really, that Hashem wanted it. You put in some other substance there.
Because the Rimloch is Masha Sosma. So let's discuss that. Is that a problem? How big the hole is? Yeah. Okay, so you look at it as I'm saying, you let me know. So this is what he's saying. He's saying that the crack is a problem when you're putting devik. Also, Rashi doesn't say exactly what that problem is. Do they say what the problem with the case of Nistik with Dovko's puzzle? Is that the halacha of Shnei Shefaris? What's the problem?
It's split in two.
The Nistik. I mean, I don't know if that's the case of Dibik Shivri Shefaris. Are they both a problem? Is like two Shefaris?
Rashi says kuloi, and it says also chelis like the rochboy.
Which
In other
case?
words, these are.
That's later. We're
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
So let's see first. Let's first go through the cases to see if it comes up.
So maybe this is refers to our Mishnah that later Rashi. That the listic meaning is the kilo.
Depends. We're going to see the La'arka and L'Rachba. We're going to see about if there's like the shadows of a crack. You're saying it's cracked the whole thing, and then it's like you glue it together. So then it would be puzzle. But Nikiv is Sasmai. So Nikiv is like, okay, so it has a hole, so what's the problem?
Doesn't have to be a certain size of shofar. So
That does.
it's
Well,
less
that we're going to
size.
see it does have to have a certain size. Kolakos Kshen Taisa says that really
From the Rashi later in the Gemara is mashma that even if there was crack, but Kedei Achize he had enough of the
Yeah.
the matter, that means that originally cracked is the whole thing. The possibility that if there is left enough to be proper size of a shofar, then it would be kosher. So obviously the nizdak means the whole thing. Pashtus.
Okay, we'll see. So the Nikiv Sasma, he says, if let's say it has a hole and he closes it up. He says, Im Akiv es atkiya. So if let's say, the question is, what are we talking about? Is it the hole or is it actually the seal? If it holds back, meaning if it changes the sound of the tkiya, then it's possible it's going to be possible. Then not kosher, it's going to be kosher. So that's one case. So then another case says the Mishnah tekiya techabor. Some of what?
What does it mean?
Right, what does mean ma'akev? It holds back. Is that it changes it? Because that's what Taisa discusses also. He says that kol hakol is sharing b'shayfer. All the sounds are kosher b'shayfer. So what does it mean that it's ma'akev? That it holds it back? It's just changing it?
So change.
So it's not the sound of the shayfer, it's the sound of the steamer? That could be a problem, because if it's getting the sound of that material or whatever it is, so then that would be not the sound of the shayfer.
The article says it's the sound.
Then what?
The article says that's the sound, it's not the same sound.
Not the same sound. So hatakelu techabar. If someone blows into a pit, or into a cistern, or techapitas, and we quoted this on Omen Aleph, or into a barrel. So it depends. Imkal shefer shama. If he's hearing the sound of the shefer, like those who are like in this picture inside the pit, so then Yosef fulfills his obligation. Imkal avava shama. If he hears the sound of the echo, then Liyotzi has not fulfilled his obligation, because again, it's not the kol shofar. And that's why, again, you always have to hear the shofar itself, and that's the problem with a lot of these cases, with the stima, if it affects it. Let's say someone is walking behind the shul. Let's say they live right next door to the shul. And he hears the sound of the shofar, the sound of the Kriyas Megillah. So, if he was focusing, then fulfills his obligation. But if not, Liyotzi is not fulfilled his obligation. Now, why? In both cases, the guy is hearing it. What's the problem? The difference is one of them he's focusing, and therefore he's yaitza. And the other one, where he's not focusing, and therefore he's not going to be yaitza, his chiv of l'shmaya, of hearing the Megillah or hearing the Kol Shofar. So the Bryce is going to expound on a lot of these cases and add on a lot more cases also. So turn about we're in the Bryce. Aruch, let's say the shofar was very long, but katzrei and they shortened it. So kasha, it's going to be kasha. The Bryce says the chiddush is that it shouldn't be a problem with what's called a havarta. It has to be exactly as it grew on the animal, as we'll see actually one of the cases mentions that. It's okay, if it was long and he made it shorter, it's going to be kasha. Let's say garber, let's say he scraped off the shofar, v'mida al gilda, and it's remaining with a very thin layer of the horn, kasha is going to be valid. Suppose zav b'makom v'nachas peh, we quoted this before. Let's say they plated gold by where you put the mouth. Well, that's possible because again, you're blowing in the gold, not into the shofar. Not where the mouth goes, then kasha can be kasha. Let's say you plated gold from within, meaning then possibly it's going to be invalid because again, that's also blowing with the gold because it's going inside where you're blowing and it's going in the gold. Let's say you put it on the outside. So then here also you see the same idea. In the Shtana Kodim Mekamoy Shahoyu, so this is why it would make sense, like we translated before, Ma'akav Satkiya, if the gold's even just on the outside, Arebe Shofar, with gold, if it's going to change the sound, then it's going to be possible. The Mlav is not kosher, it's going to be kosher. So you see, even just changing, altering the sound, even though it's not, the shofar is a shofar and it's not touching, you're not blowing into the gold, if you're going to change it, you're not hearing exactly the sound of the shofar, that's absurd. Nika v'sasmai. So this is a case that we mentioned earlier in the Mishnah, which we were discussing exactly. So here also it says, if let's say it has a hole and you seal it, say ma'akav satkiya, if it changes, if it holds back, the tekiya puzzle is possible. Not kasha mikasha. Let's say nessun shofar b'tek shofar. Let's say you put a shofar inside another shofar. So here it also depends, and also there's differences how to explain it exactly. But in kol pnim mishama, if you're hearing the sound of the inner one, which let's say its mouth is sticking out more and you're blowing into that one, so then you have to fulfill the obligation because that's what you're blowing into. Because your blowing is going to the innermost one. So if you're hearing the sound of the inner one, but let's say the outer one is the one that's sticking out more and you're blowing into that one, you're hearing the sound of the outer one, then you have not fulfilled the obligation because you have the mechitzas of the inner one are interposing from the tekiah that you're blowing. More halachas than the brisa. Garda, if let's say you scrape off the parts of the shofar, whether from the inside or from the outside, kasher can be kasher, as long as you have a layer of the shofar. Garda b'midal gildi, even if you scrape it until it's like on this thin layer of the shofar, kasher can be kasher. Hanich shofar b'tech shofar, as we said this halacha before, if you place a shofar inside another shofar and kol panim mishama, if you hear the sound of the inner one, you yotza, and kol chitin shama, if you hear the sound of the outer one, yotza again because that is a chatzitza from the inner one. Let's say hafka v'takabai. Let's say you inverted the shofar and you blew in it. Lo yotza, not fully obligation. Now, Amar Papa says, and don't say that this psul is a case of hafka kikatuna, that when we say you turned it inside out like a shirt, meaning that you made the inside the outside and the outside the inside. That's not the case we're saying of hafka, that is possible. Ela even shahir chavesa katzer, what you did is you widened the narrow part, v'kitza sadachim, and you narrowed the wider part. So like you took hot water, and you went and you changed it around, you went and you took the wide part and you narrowed it, and you took the narrow part and you widened it. And that's going to be possible. My time, what's the reason? Because kedira masna. The Amar Masna says, it says in the pasuk in Yikra v'havarta, and you're going to pass by a shofar of trua on the 7th month, which, although that's by Yabel, but we learn that the laws of Rosh Hashanah from Yabel and Yabel from Rosh Hashanah, which tells us derech habarasa bina. It has to be a way of how it's the way Rashi says it, like an aisle is ma'videi b'roisha b'behem machayim. V'havarta has to be the way it normally passes by, that is in the normal way of things, which is just like in the animal, it's the narrow is the narrow and the wide is the wide. That's how you have to blow it. That's what the Havarta teaches you, and therefore it's going to be invalid if you make the wide the narrow and the narrow the wide. Said in the Mishnah, the second case was Divik Shivir Shefar is puzzle. We said specifically if you connect the broken piece of the shofar, it's going to be invalid, which that's what we were explaining on the Dibur Maskal of puzzle. On that case of, because as Rashi says, like two shefaras. So on that says the Gemara, Talmud Lina Braisa, Haisavalav Kolshu. Let's say you add on a little bit to the shofar. And maybe this is the case of the first case of the glue, when you have nistik that it's cracked, the divkoi, and you attach it with glue. The reason why it might be puzzle is because it's like, it's not one shofar, it's versus, that's why I think Nika Vesasmoi was a different shmuz. It wasn't so much as in adding on anything different, it was just sealing, it was just closing it. Let's say you went and you did some type with hot water and you went and you stretched the shofar itself. But here, the Gemara tells us if you add on something else, whether it's the same species, meaning you use a shofar, a horn, or whether it's something else, puzzle, then it's going to be invalid. Now, that's if you're adding on to the shofar. Nikiv, now let's say there's a hole, the sasmai, and you sealed it, so puzzle, says the Tanakama there also, it's going to be the same thing. Whether you're using the shofar itself or whether you're using something else, it's going to be puzzle. And last time he says, no, depends. The minay kasher, if you're using it with the same species, meaning you're using the shofar itself to seal the hole, and as Rashi points out, it's not ma'akav the tekiya, it's not changing the sound, so then it's going to be kasher. Shleim min puzzle. If it's not that same min, then it's going to be puzzle. Now, on this teaching of the Braisa, that you said the minay kasher, Reb Nassan said that if, which sounds like the halacha of the Mishnah, that if using the same min, then it's going to be kasher. So Rabbi Yechanan, he qualifies, and there's two different versions of how he says this. He says, "V'hush nishtay rubai." This, if you have a hole and you plug it up, it's going to be kasher. If you're using the shofar itself, is only ishin nishtay rubai if that the majority of the shofar remain, and then you plug it up with the min of the shofar, that's going to be okay. Now, which Machlal says about the inference is the shleim minay. If it was plugging it up, let's say with something else, even the majority of the shofar remains, puzzle would be invalid. That's according to one version. There are those who actually teach on the seifa of the Braisa. The seifa said that the shleim, if you plug it up with something else, some other material, puzzle is going to be invalid. On that, Rabbi Yechanan says, it's only going to be puzzle if two conditions be met in the psul. That not only are you using the shleim, but the majority of it was had a hole in it. The inference is the b'mina, when you're using the same type as the shofar, even if most of it was diminished, still kasher, to be kasher if you're plugging it up with the type of the shofar. So those are two different versions of the Yechanan. Either you need two conditions for the good to make it okay, or two conditions for the bad to make it not okay. Now the Braisa continues, if you play the gold from the inside, so apostle, so that's going to be invalid. And if you played it mibachutz from the outside, so that we mentioned also before, if the sound changes as it was originally, puzzle is going to be invalid. Then love, not kosher, it's going to be kosher. And here's where we get up to the cases that we mentioned before. Nistak. If let's say it cracked totally, la'arkai, to the length, so then puzzle it's going to be invalid. So maybe that's what you were saying, that's the case of shayf, but that's not, because that's just nistak. Then we said bedavkai. I think that's a different psul, because I think it's the devik shabai. That's what it sounds like. Is what in bedavkai. Al kaponim, but the Gemara is saying that if you go ahead and you have a crack, so it depends exactly where it is. So la'arkai, if it's along the length, it's a puzzle. That's going to invalidate it because the whole thing is cracked. L'rachba, if it's along the width, which is that the whole along the entire perimeter, it cracks. So if it remains over there, from the place of the crack till where the mouth of the baltakei blows, shir tekiya, the amount of how much it requires that's necessary for blowing, then kasha is going to be valid. Because, yeah, it's cracked, and it's like you removed it totally. So that's like the case of archa katsha, when it was longer and you took it off. So that would be okay. But if not, if it doesn't remain the shir tekiya, then pasuk is going to be invalid. And the kama shir tekiya, how much is the shir of blowing? So he explains that you should hold it in your hand. That you could see the shofar on either side of the hand. So if you remain with that amount, so even if it's nistak, the whole thing along the width, can't make believe it's not there. But la'arkai, that's the whole thing along the length, that just, you can't use half of a shofar. So then that's the case where it would be possible. Now, if let's say the sound was thin, or thick, or dry, but the K is getting already, it's drying up already. So kasher, it doesn't make a difference, it's going to be valid. The reason is, all the sounds are kasher by a shofar, as long as something comes out, that's okay. They sent to the father of Shmuel the following case, kadachai. If let's say they bore a hole through, which now the Gemara assumes it means to say where the person Baltakeh puts his mouth, where he blows through the horn of the shofar, they bore a hole over there to make a hole. But Takabai, and he blows over there, so he says Yatza. They sent him that he fulfilled the obligation. But Pshita, obviously, all shofars, that's how it's sealed, it's clogged up. You have to make a hole through it, and then you blow. So what's the chiddush? So Rashi says, no, we're talking about one, when the shofar and the horn is attached to the animal, there's a bone that protrudes from the head and goes into the horn. Now, we remove that bone from the shofar, but this person didn't remove the bone. He actually cracked the shofar off the head of the animal, and he kept the bone inside, and he bore a hole through that bony part of the head, and made a hole through that, keeping that inside the shofar. That even though it's the same type, but it's a chatzitza because it's a bony part of the animal, and it's not part of the actual shofar horn itself. That's the chiddush was saying that no, they sent him that halacha that if you bore a hole through it, that's not a problem. It's not going to be considered as a chatzitza. The Mishnah said at the kelo techabor, someone blows into a pit or techadus or into a cistern, etc. So it depends. If they hear the sound of the shofar, they're yotze. If they hear the sound of the echo, they're not yotze. So Rav Huna says that we didn't learn this halacha of the psul of havara, of the invalidation of the echo. That was only for those who are standing on the edge of the pit, where they cannot discern what's between the actual sound and the echo. But those who are standing in the pit, so yatsu, they fulfill their obligation because they're always hearing the sound of the shofar when they're inside the pit. Someone blows inside a pit or inside a system, yatsu is filled the obligation. But now we learned in our Mishnah that lo yatsu is not filled the obligation when you blow into a pit. Obviously it's like Rav Huna, that depends. For the people on the outside, they're hearing the echo, they're not yatsu. People in the pit, they're hearing the sound of the shofar, they're going to be yatsu. One more version, actually there were certain students, they didn't teach Rav Huna as a qualifier, as a loishanu to explain the halacha of the Mishnah. Rather, they posed it as a contradiction, the Mishnah and the Braisa, and that Rav Huna was coming to answer. On the one hand, now within the Mishnah, the Kila Techabal Techadus Liyatzav, some goes into a pit and says it's not fulfilling obligation. I would tell you in the Braisa that Yatzav is fulfilling obligation. And Rav Huna says, like Kasha is not difficult. Kan, the halacha of our Mishnah is loisin amim al-svasabar. For those who are standing on the edge of the pit, they're not yet because they hear the sound of the echo. Kan, the Braisa is talking about loisin amim al-bar. For those who are standing in the pit, they're yetzer because they're hearing the actual sound of the shofar and not the sound of the echo. Thank you to any time.